questions on as well. Great, it looks like a lot of people are rolling in now, so I'll just wait for a few more people to get in. Hi everyone, welcome to this special webinar on getting into book publicity hosted by Creative Access and the Publishers Publicity Circle. Whilst we're waiting for a few more people to join, we'd love to learn more about you. So please do drop your name, where you're based and what you do into the chat. And we'll wait for a few more people to join us. Oh, sorry, the chat is disabled. Thank you for that. I didn't realize it was just the panelists. Okay, no worries. Thanks for letting us know in the Q&A. Right, I think we'll get started then. So this webinar is being hosted by Creative Access and the Publishers Publicity Circle as part of National Careers Week. We thought it was a great time to highlight the career path that we feel like a lot of people talk about, but maybe aren't quite sure what exactly a job in publicity, book publicity might look like or how to break into it. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Publishers Publicity Circle, or the PPC, is the network representing book publicists from all areas of the publishing industry, including freelancers, agencies, big publishers, and indie publishers. They support publicists' professional development and provide a forum for publicists to share ideas and network. They are also committed to increasing representation in books, PR, and widen access to careers through outreach, including events like these. And you can follow them on X and Blue Sky. Just to introduce myself, my name's Rochelle. I am the marketing and comms manager at Creative Access. We have a really amazing panel of speakers with us today at different levels in their career, working at publishing houses such as Simon & Schuster, HarperCollins UK, Hachette UK, and Canongate. I'll shortly be passing over to their chair, Saba Khan. But firstly, before I hand over, just a little bit of housekeeping from us. This webinar is going to be recorded and posted on our YouTube, so you can watch back in the future. We'd also be really grateful if you can make sure your Zoom name is your full name or the name you signed up to the event with, so that we can mark you off on our attendee list. And we've got a few Creative Access staff on the call, so if you're having any tech issues, you can just pop a message into the Q&A and one of us should be able to help you. In terms of format for today's event, we'll have the panel discussion for the next 35 minutes or so, where we'll do our best to cover some of the amazing questions that you've all sent ahead in advance. And from about 20 to 2, we'll move on to a Q&A section where you can submit your own questions to our panel, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. If you want to share about the event on socials today, please do. We'd really love to see your posts. You can tag us at _Creative Access. So without further ado, I will switch my camera off and hand over to Saba to take it away.
Thank you, Rochelle. Hi, everyone. I'm Saba Khan, Publicity Director at Simon & Schuster UK, working across a variety of titles. I'm also former co-chair of the DEIC at SNS and a founding member of Elevate, an employee network for people of colour at HarperCollins. I'm a South Asian woman with dark wavy hair. Today, I'm wearing a pink jumper. The campaign that I'm proudest of working on is Michael Holding's Why We Kneel, How We Rise, a book about racism in sport and what we can do to make systemic change. It won the William Hill Sports Book of the Year award in 2021, won the PPC Sports Campaign of the Year, and I was shortlisted for a Nibby. Francis, over to you, please.
Hi, I'm Frances Maloney and I am Senior PR Manager at Barrington Stoke, which is part of HarperCollins UK. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman with brown hair wearing a gingham top. And the campaign that I am most proud of working on, I was torn between two, but the one I'm choosing is what I'm working on at the moment, which is the first book from Carnegie Medal winning author Anthony McGowan. It's his first book in 5 years, and the book is called The Bet. And I'd like to pass over to Io.
Hi, I'm Ayo Okoji. I work at Quercus Books as a press officer and imprint at Hachette, working across fiction and non-fiction on a variety of campaigns. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a mixed heritage woman wearing a pink jumper and shirt with brown hair. The campaign I'm most proud of working on is The Silver Blood Promise by James Logan, which was a debut epic fantasy book last year that got widespread science fiction and fantasy coverage and was picked for multiple best books of 2024 lists. It was really rewarding setting it up in that space for the series to come. And I'm going to hand over to you, Amani.
Hi, I'm Amani. Amani Ben-Harali. I work at Canongate as a publicity assistant. I am wearing a white shirt today and I am a woman of mixed heritage. My pronouns are she, her as well. A campaign that I did last year was called Brother Do You Love Me, which charted the lockdown experience of two brothers, and one of the brothers, the younger brother, had Down syndrome, and so it was quite an interesting dynamic between the two of them, and it became a Sunday Times bestseller. I'm going to hand over to Lucy.
Hi everyone, I'm Lucy Martin. I'm a publicity manager at Little Brown Book Group, which is a division of Hachette UK. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a white woman with glasses and brown hair wearing a stripy t-shirt today. A campaign that I'm most proud of is a few years ago I worked on the campaign for Walk Yourself Happy by Julia Bradbury, the presenter journalist, and it was a Sunday Times bestseller, and I'm kind of proud of it because I feel like it was great to see people really resonate with kind of such a personal and sensitive story, and that was really rewarding.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're just going to go straight in. Io, can you start us off? What is book publicity?
Well, I would say book publicity has a big focus on creating media relationships and festival and bookshop relationships too. And you're kind of creating buzz for books. And the main goal is to amplify an author or book's visibility through reviews, interviews, and events. And you spend a lot of time with the author, often in book publicity as well, I would say.
Great. And what is the difference between marketing and publicity?
So I'd say one of the main differences are the kind of unpaid opportunities and buzz building, like reviews and interviews are usually up to the journalist to decide. So you really need to convince them that this is the book they should be reviewing. Same with sort of festivals as well. There can be payment involved in publicity, but generally marketing, you're kind of paying for those spots. Whereas publicity, you are pitching for those spots and you are hoping that the journalist chooses them. So you need to be very convincing. That's what I think is the difference, but it can vary from company to company where that kind of line is drawn.
Right. And what would you say a typical day in the life of a publicist is?
So I think there's a lot of emails, there's a lot of pitching, sort of checking if there's any coverage that has come through as well. Is there a new review? Is there a new interview opportunity? And you are the person who's going to work out the logistics of when that's going to work best. Maybe there's a festival or a event you're planning. You might need to book some trains or a hotel in some cases. You might read a new submission as well for like the company, for the publisher, and kind of feedback on what you think could work if you got this book. You know, what are the angles that might work for publicity? Is that a focus for that book? And you might attend a launch event as well. This is like everything in one day, but you might attend a launch event for an author in the evening, which will be a moment, or an event, which is a moment to celebrate the book's release. They might be in conversation with another author, or it might be kind of having a toast and a discussion around the book.
Great, thank you. Frances, how would you say that working in publicity varies if you're working for a major sort of big five versus working at an indie?
I think the main difference is probably at a big publisher, there is a lot more structure, and there's usually a lot more people in the various roles. So you may start as an assistant, for example. So an assistant might be writing press releases, they might be mailing out books to journalists. In a smaller company, there might just be one person working in PR or a couple of people, which is, although I'm at HarperCollins, we're a small team in Barrington-Stoke, and we do everything. So we split the authors, you know, one publicist has half the authors, the other publicist has the others, and we do everything. So I think if you're in a smaller company, you might get a chance to gain a more broad variety of experience more quickly. But in a big company, you'll have more of a support network and maybe more people to mentor you into, you know, career progression.
Great, thank you. Lucy, can you talk to us a bit about the process for a campaign? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think first of all, it starts in sort of to understand timelines, and maybe starts kind of 6 months before the book publishes, and it kind of starts first of all with you talking to the author, if that's relevant, if there's an author involved, and you might get a sense from them about kind of how they see the book and anything that they see as an angle that could be used for publicity or something that they might want to talk about, and sort of whether they're available to do publicity, whether they're based in the UK and can do events, whether they are available to do podcast interviews, that sort of thing. And then a sort of key part alongside that is you identifying what it is about this book that can reach the sort of broadest readership possible, and identifying those strands, which we would call publicity angles, which you can then pull on to sort of secure different bits of press. So it might be, if you're working on a nature book, that you identify it's got a wellbeing strand, which you can then sort of try to get the author on wellbeing podcasts. Or if you're working on a history book, then you might want to get the author at a history festival. It's about trying to identify those different angles and how you're going to reach those readers. And then also it's writing a really strong pitch, and a pitch is essentially just a bit of text that you can then use to try and persuade people, particularly journalists, to read the book and then cover it in some sort of way. And it's being creative and being persuasive in your language, and when you pitch that book in person to them as well. But yeah, it's those sorts of things which happen from the start, and then you're doing that until the book publishes, which is then when the publicity will hopefully run.
Great, thank you. Armani, what skills would you say are needed to be a book publicist?
I think that it's really varied, and I think the key one is going to be communication skills that can be based off of any previous experience as well, because often you are with a author at sometimes their most vulnerable stage, when there's a lot of nerves, but also excitement at the same time. And so you have to manage that in a way that's very caring, because this is literally their project that they've been working on for a fair amount of years at that point, probably. So those communication skills, I feel like also it's really important for organization as well, which again can come from various different experiences as well, because you are helping an author get from A to B just in terms of like day-to-day stuff if they've got a particularly busy tour, but also you're reminding them that, you know, they've got a deadline for a piece that we've pitched for a feature, or you're asking them to feedback on something that people like, something that's come in. So you're constantly having to like manage all of that, but you're also doing that with multiple authors at a time. So with each author, you might be at a different stage of the campaign. So it's just like organization in that sense is you're working on many different projects. And so project management is quite key.
Thank you. And when we spoke before, you mentioned sort of different skills between kind of being like an introvert versus an extrovert, and what the typical personality types are for a publicist. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so I think I always thought before I got into the industry that you, like typically a publicist would be somebody who's quite extroverted, and that's not something that is quite natural to me. And I think that I've actually found that sometimes my softer skills in that sense, and like how I am an introvert, has actually helped to be able to communicate those things more gently, have like been able to like, there's a way in which you can still build all of those relationships with journalists and people who run book events and bookshops, so and reviewers as well, in a way that's still just as nourishing, even if you're not an extrovert.
Great, thank you. Lucy, how can you showcase your skills when you lack experience? If you're sort of thinking about coming into the industry, what's something you might recommend to people?
I think it's just recognizing that absolutely anything you do can demonstrate different skills. You don't need to, there's not sort of one set path into being a publicist. You can demonstrate the skills that Amani's mentioned already, from a variety of different sort of jobs and experiences. So if you've worked in a shop or you've worked on a reception or in a bar, you can say that that demonstrates communication skills and problem solving skills, and organizational skills and admin skills, which ultimately is what people are going to be looking for. And if you've not sort of had that direct experience, you've not had work experience or an internship or voluntary experience within sort of the book industry, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't demonstrate those skills and that passion for books in other ways. And yeah, ultimately as well, I think what everyone just wants to see when they're hiring for roles is just how you match the skills in the job description. So really just look through the job description when you are applying for roles and think about how you can demonstrate those skills in varied ways. And also just a passion for books, which I assume most people who've joined this will have, and how you can sort of pick out from that company what it is about that role that you really want to do. But I would say, yeah, just don't worry if you don't have those that specific books background. You can get those skills in lots of different ways, and it might be that you have adjacent experience like working in a library or a bookshop, and that's really valuable as well. But don't feel put off if you haven't got that sort of direct publishing experience, as that's not expected.
That's great, thank you. Frances, so you moved into publicity from elsewhere in the business. Can you talk to us a bit about that and what that was like for you?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I haven't had a traditional, a lot of people in publishing, they might start, say, as an editorial assistant and then become an editor and then become a senior commission editor, or the same in publicity. Whereas I started out in sales. I originally wanted to get into editorial because I thought that was where, you know, I think that's a lot of people, that's where they want to work when they start out. But I think, first of all, you know, you just need to get into the industry. So I first of all started in sales, and then I did eventually move into editorial, and then realized actually my area that I liked the most and where my strengths were was communication, talking to the authors, talking to, you know, different people in the industry, going to meetings with people, being out and about, which editorial is a great job. No shade to editorial, but it's quite sedentary a lot of the time. It's quite desk-based. So I think it's really interesting if you can get experience in different departments, whether that's through paid work experience or through, you know, just getting an assistant role in any department, then you can work out which area of the business, because you'll be, you know, working with people across the business, which one do you think would work best for you, and don't be afraid to want to change departments, because if you're working in sales, you're pitching books to customers, and in PR we pitch books to newspapers, journalists, festivals. If you're working in editorial, you're handling author care, and in PR we look after the authors alongside the editors. We often have a really close relationship with authors, so each department has transferable skills, a bit like what Lucy was saying with other roles outside the industry. Within the industry, any role that you have will have transferable skills into other parts of the business.
And if you were someone thinking about making that sort of sidestep, what would you suggest as a kind of way to go about it?
I think it's always good to show what you're doing, even if you're in the industry. It's also still good to show things that you're doing sort of in your own time. So if you're looking to move into publicity, say you might be doing book reviews, you know, in your spare time, or you might have a BookTok account that shows your passion alongside your day-to-day job. It's also building those contacts within your own company in other departments. Some companies offer a mentoring scheme where you can have a mentor from a different part of the company, and that can be really interesting. Obviously, if you want to apply for a job internally, there is, you know, a way you need to handle that with your manager and with the other department, but as long as it's done, you know, out in the open and everyone knows what's happening, most managers will support you in your decision to move department if they feel that's the right career progression for you and the right time for you. So don't be scared to have those honest conversations, because I know it can be very daunting to have to say your manager that you're thinking of applying for a job in another department, but you need to be open and honest about that before you apply as well.
Thank you. I think, yeah, that's a great answer. Lucy, you have been promoted a few times. Congratulations. What does career progression look like in publicity?
Yeah, so I think obviously it varies massively between company and the type of publisher that you work for. But I think generally sort of communications departments like marketing and publicity have sort of quite good opportunities for progression. And generally, when you start in an entry-level role, an assistant role, most of it will be admin, and a lot of our jobs even now are very admin-based, as we've said. But you'll get hopefully the opportunity to kind of learn from people who are doing campaigns, the opportunity to sort of ask questions about how those campaigns run, and just really get immersed in how campaigns sort of play out from the start. And you can also do things to kind of drive that. Like, you can ask, when you do have that first job, you can ask to go to meetings and to learn about things, and ask questions about people's campaigns. And you can do that before you get roles as well. You can reach out to people on social channels or at events like this or in person and ask for advice about campaigns. And then I think just sort of generally with any job, it's just good to keep records of when you've done really great things, just to keep track of when you have had really nice praise from people, or when you've done kind of like a really good job on something and someone's commented on that. I think just to keep records of those, and then you can have those kind of open conversations about progression with your manager or whoever it is, and also draw on other areas of support. So one of the things that makes Hachette really great, which is where Io and I work, is that we have employee networks. So those are networks for staff to join, and I'm co-chair of the Altogether network at Hachette, which is for staff from lower socioeconomic and or regional backgrounds. And you can find support in those networks from people at all different levels across the business in different departments, and also within kind of your own circles and your own colleagues. And you can ask for advice and just talk about it, really, which I think is always helpful. But I would just say it's kind of similar again to what Amani said, but you don't need to be sort of one certain type of person to be a publicist, and anything that you do that is good enough. Like, you don't need to be the most confident person in the room who's really good at networking and really good at securing press by kind of impressing people in person. You could be an amazing communicator over email, or really good at building one-on-one relationships, and it's just about kind of playing to your strengths as much as possible, and you don't need to be sort of one type of person to succeed. I was quite long-winded, but generally I would say progression opportunities are quite good in publicity, whereas perhaps in other departments people stay in junior roles for a little bit longer, which is definitely a big positive about working in publicity, I would say.
Great, thank you. And then obviously you touched on staff networks and things like that. Does anyone else have any examples of community support that they get in the industry?
Well, I'm part of the Thrive Network. I'm the books lead for the Thrive Network. So I kind of helped to talk about wider discussions within the Thrive Network, but I set up the employee book club along with somebody else. So I think Hachette has a great kind of talking about kind of support within the industry. They have a great kind of pillar to the whole company, which is called Changing the Story, which is particularly looking at diversity and inclusion and making that at the center of the business, which has been a really nice thing to see joining a year ago. And I think if you can join networks or like groups within publishing, that is a really positive thing, whatever level of career you're at. Like, you've got Society of Young Publishers as well, and then within your company, you might have Elevate or Thrive or Gender Balance and everything else. And I think just taking being part of those communities and those discussions are really important within publicity and publishing generally, and you can kind of also connect to people in the wider team as well. Being in a regional office, I'm in Bristol, we have a lot of like outreach as part of our kind of mission as well. So I set up a panel for Southwest publishers, so that's kind of creating a support bubble there as well. So you can also sometimes create your own outreach and support networks in your local area.
Yeah,
I think I've
No,
gone
that's
off the
perfect,
question
thank
there, but
No, that's perfect. And I think actually something we wanted to talk about was, you know, we all know that publishing tends to be very London specific. Obviously, you've talked about a regional office. Francis, I think you're also regionally based, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm up in Glasgow, and that was one thing I was wanting to mention with the Children's Books North Network, which is really good for anyone who's based in the north of England or Scotland. They actually have a mentoring scheme that runs every year, which matches people who are trying to get into publishing with someone from the industry that's also based in the north of England. So that's a really good way to, you know, you get a mentor, they help you with your CV, they help you with sort of job application questions, and you can ask them questions that you want to ask them as well. So that's a good network in the north. There are less publishers, I would say, out of London, that's true, but a lot of the bigger publishers have opened offices out of London now, which is good. For example, HarperCollins has Harper North, and then there are, you know, there are publishers based out of London, and there are more opportunities to work remotely. And I'd also say to have a look at things like book subscription boxes and, you know, PR roles that aren't maybe within like a traditional publishing house, but might still like working for a prize like the Women's Prize for Fiction, or, you know, there can be roles that are PR that aren't maybe right in a publishing house, but could help widen your search slightly, especially if you're looking out of London.
Brilliant, thank you. And what would you say, Armani, has changed in the industry for the better while you've been here? Is there something specific that your publisher does for inclusivity and DEI?
I think it's like discussions like this that have become more and more part of it. It's like kind of communities like the PPC, which is the Publicity Circle, which are collaborating with Creative Access to create more panelled events where people can see more access like this across the place. Like, I feel like when I first thought about going into publishing, it didn't occur to me until maybe after university. And so I feel like yeah, organizations like Creative Access are able to kind of go to universities a bit more earlier now, that are more like wide reaching, because I don't think my university considered publishing as a career program place for people like our students to go into it. And so I feel like those kind of things are developing, and I feel like there's quite a few things on LinkedIn that are really helpful as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Is there anything else that anyone else wants to add in terms of other things that publishers are doing?
I would just say really quickly, everyone's kind of mentioned it, but like mentoring schemes are really useful. The Publishers Publicity Circle, the PPC, who are hosting this, they do like a mentoring where you can be mentored by someone outside of your company when you are working within publicity, and that's really useful again for having kind of conversation. You can have wider conversations, not just about your campaigns, but also about what you might want in the future and that sort of thing, which is really useful. And I mentioned the SYP, like they do mentoring and that sort of thing. So any mentoring opportunities that you see, you can apply for those before you get a job, if it's not based on working in the industry, but also when you are in the industry as well. And those can be so valuable for kind of learning from someone who has, yeah, all of that experience, which I know everyone's mentioned, but yeah, I think it's always useful to keep in mind.
I think something else to add to that would be, you know, if you go to any like panel things in person and there's a bit of a networking opportunity afterwards, or like a chat opportunity is a better word than networking, then take advantage of that with some really like thought out questions, because that it almost is like a little mini mentoring as well. Sometimes people can be open to sharing their like tips and tricks and give you advice specific to your situation as well. So I would say linked place where you might as well send a message if you see somebody doing something you're interested in, and you're not going to lose anything from doing that, but you will gain some knowledge if they reply.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Thank you. So I know that we're going to open up to questions in a moment, but before we do that, I just had one final question for you all. As we know, publishing is a competitive industry. So do you have any final tips on how to stand out?
Oh, who wants? Shall I go?
Yeah, sorry, Francis, you go.
Sorry, yeah. I think my top tip is always to, in your cover letter, talk about the things that you're doing that outside of work that might, that have anything to do with books. So whether that's writing book reviews online, working in a bookshop, having your own book talk account, anything you can think of that demonstrates your passion for books, and how that applies to the job you're applying for. So if it's commercial women's fiction, talk about commercial women's fiction. If it's children's books, talk about children's books, and make it specific, and make sure that you tailor your cover letter to that exact job that you're applying for.
Yeah, and I was just going to add and say, like, it's like you don't even have to create content that you're in if you don't want to put yourself out there. It's just about demonstrating, like, if we are all chronically online, then you might as well use that to your advantage and just show that you're on top of recent trends, and you could reference an event that you might have gone to recently, or a piece of publicity or a review that you saw recently that really spoke to you. So it's like demonstrating that you are reading and you are part of the wider conversation around books in general. You don't have to like necessarily also be in the content that you're referencing.
I think adding to that as well, we have Book Brunch and The Bookseller, which is industry news. So some of it is free, I think. And so you don't have, there's not too much of a barrier to reading it, but it will give you an insight into those trends and acquisitions. And I would just recommend really researching the place that you're going to be a part of, and generally what's going on in the industry. Bookseller and Book Brunch tell you the news of like what's the big debate of the day, who's won something, who's been kind of submitted for or like longlisted for a prize. I think those two are really good. I think also a really great resource when you're trying to get into publishing to kind of understand the landscape is a book called The Writers and Artists Yearbook, which lists every single publisher in the UK. And you've also got a children's version of that. So that's more kind of where might I want to work? Independents and bigger publishers. And one last thing I would say is don't be afraid to send speculative applications, which a speculative application sounds kind of weird, but it's just sending a cover letter and CV and just saying, do you have a job available? Do you have any opportunities for me to kind of work here? You can tailor it to a specific role. That's more with independents than bigger publishers, but they might not have a job listing, but they might keep your CV on file, which is something I've had experience of. So, but obviously tailor the cover letter to the place and to kind of demonstrate why you'd want to work there and what kind of thing you'd be interested in doing. And I think that can be really great place to start, those two places.
And I would say, again, just like it's so important to really tailor the application to the job you're applying for, because, they are competitive jobs. And if a hiring manager is reading like loads of identical applications, but yours is the one that says like, I love these books that you publish. I really loved this review you got for this book last year. That is like the thing that kind of can help you set apart. So really I know that job applications take such a long time and it's a big thing, but it just is like one of the best ways to just make sure that your application is the best it can be. And also I would say social media obviously can be challenging, but is a really good way of finding people who work in the jobs that you might want to do. So I know a lot of people are moving kind of off X, but you could look on X and Blue Sky and Instagram and look for people who work kind of at publishers that you might want to work for or in specific roles. And I'm not saying like bombard people, but I think if you ever wanted to like drop a message to someone who might be in a role that you want to do, and as long as you're polite and kind of don't expect that they're going to give up a lot of time. It can be a good way of just building those connections if you don't know kind of anyone in the industry or even what that entails. And that was one of the things I did before I got my first job, and I think it really helped. So I would just say use social media if it helps you, but to just remember, like, people are very busy, and if they haven't got time to speak to you, it's not about you or anything. It's just yeah, they're busy. But it can sometimes just help with getting away in sometimes. But yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you very much. I would just add to that as well, in addition to all the social medias that you mentioned, also LinkedIn, because I know that we as a publisher have a page on there. I know that HarperCollins do, PRH do, and it's where you'll tend to see things like, there has been a question on here about internships and apprenticeships, and actually you would find all that information on a publisher LinkedIn page. So hopefully that's covered off that question. Okay, I'm just going through, we've had a lot of questions, so thank you everyone. I've got one. I'm going to start, Io, with you. Do you work across fiction and non-fiction?
Yes, I do.
Okay, great. So you can answer this question. Is there a difference in how you would approach the campaigns for fiction versus non-fiction? Are the only differences that journalist publications, or is there a different structure for the overall campaign?
That's a great question. Yes, there is a slight difference in the sense that fiction often has much longer lead time, which is a very kind of publishing specific word, I guess, but you need to pitch to fiction sometimes 6 months before, whereas with non-fiction it can be more like 6 weeks before. So very different in terms of that sort of project managing of the different types of campaigns that you're working on at one time. So I would say just thinking about timings can be quite different to start with, and the places that you're pitching might be different as well. Like with non-fiction, I've worked on a book called How Herbs Healed the World and a book called The Tree That Bends. Both sound like they're gardening books, but one of them is more like a nature knowledge one, and one of them is actually a psychology one. So the research that goes into both will be very different, and the people that I'm approaching will be different, and maybe the kind of wellness psychology ones will have sometimes a longer lead time if it's a physical magazine or if it's more online. But yeah, basically the way I'd approach it is, once again, who's the audience? How am I going to reach them? Is it in print? Is it in big magazines? Is it online? If it's online, it's a lot shorter lead. Yeah, I would say that's the difference between fiction and non-fiction. Also, features might be different as well. So with fiction, features and interview and opportunities, you're kind of looking at something to tie to the book that might need a bit more digging to find what could be a strong angle for the press. Whereas with non-fiction, often it's written by experts, so it's a lot easier to figure out, okay, well, this book is a book on mental health, so they can clearly talk about this, that, and the other, which they've talked about in the book. Or this is a book about herbs, how herbs healed the world, so we can do an extract, and maybe the type of publicity might change, or like, yeah. So you still have to kind of you still approach it in the same way of how do I reach people, but the timings can be quite different, and the kind of research can be quite different as well. I'd say fiction, although it has a variety, is longer working on those types of campaigns generally.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add? I don't know if everyone works across both fiction and non-fiction, but I feel like that was quite comprehensive. Thank you. We have had another question about a typical day in the life. Io, I think you covered that quite comprehensively there. Is there anything that anyone else wants to add in? Other things? Dodging emails?
Yeah, I just say it's quite varied, isn't it? One day you might be sat at your desk all day answering emails, pitching, sending out books to reviewers, and then another day you might be out on tour. I think one thing I'd say that's different for me, because I work in children's, is we do a lot of school tours with authors. So an author would be going around visiting schools, say for a week when a book comes out, and you might go with them as a publicist, and you'll have to book their trains and their accommodation, and you might also be out on the road with them, you know, just helping them, moral support. It's quite varied, the types of support the author might want. It might be helping them hold the books open so they can sign a book, or it might be just giving them a bit of a pep talk before a school event. So yeah, I think that's the way.
Great, thank you. And then we've got a question. Oh, very topical.
Sorry, I was going to just add, I think I
go.
forgot to add earlier is like meetings can be are quite a big part of the week as well, like kind of whole company or like one-to-one editorial or within the publicity team. There's a lot of meetings in the week. So you kind of organize your time around that. And you might have to present in those meetings as well. You might have to present your plans. And that is a part of publicity as well that I think I forgot to mention, but here you go. Added that in.
And just to add to that, obviously, the more senior you get, you also start going to pitches. I spend a lot of my time doing, someone has asked about how much reading you do during the day. And obviously, if you have the time to read during the day, that's wonderful, but you might not. But particularly in the run up to LBF, I'm finding myself doing a lot more pitches to try and get things in for our publishing in sort of 27, 28. We've had a question from someone who is going to LBF next week, and they've asked, as someone who's looking for work in publishing, what should I aim to do there, or what could benefit me in interviews, etc. at LBF? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I would say I think just even being there is great, and like being able to pick up on any trends that you might see or things that are particularly, I've never actually been to LBF, so sorry, I might be getting this completely wrong, but just things that might be like doing really well, or yeah, and if you notice that there's people on stands that kind of are having a quiet moment, I don't see why you couldn't just like go up to them and just say, could I have like 2 minutes to just pick your brain? I'm really kind of interested in what you publish, and I'm looking for a role, and they might have advice for you. Obviously, it might be that people are quite busy, so that might not be a chance. But I think just being there, also networking with other or chatting to people who are there as well, that might not necessarily be publishing professionals, but might be people in the same position to you who are looking to apply for jobs, and kind of that can be a really nice way of building community as well. Is finding people who are also in a similar position, and you can kind of help each other out. But I would just say, yeah, as much as possible, just kind of keep your eyes open and see what looks to be the kind of big trends and things that are going on. And that could be really valuable then when you're applying for a job, if you've got that kind of knowledge. But again, like not necessary if you aren't going to LBF next week.
There's also at LBF in the upstairs bit, but I don't know what it's called, but it's like the little networking hub, and that's where they host a lot of author talks and a lot of panels. I've done a panel there before, also in the main hall. So there's lots of things where they're talking about inclusion in publishing or diversity in publishing, or you get authors coming to talk about their experiences. And actually, I think if you are interested in being a publicist, it's also very useful to hear what authors have found good and what authors have found difficult, so that you can sort of think about what you would be able to add to that. So just adding that on as well. We've had so many questions. Sorry, I'm trying to. Someone has asked, what does a publicity job interview look like? Are there any particular things that we can prepare for in advance?
I just helped out with the recruitment for a role in my team, so I can maybe answer this. But I think generally a lot of it is kind of standard interview questions. It will be things generally about your skills, like it might be that you have a few interviews, and the first interview could be a lot about your skills, like can you tell us about a time you've demonstrated communication or organization, or you've solved a problem, you've made a mistake and how you've tried to fix that. I think that's a really common question which sometimes people are thrown by, but just thinking of really clear examples that don't need to be anything to do with publishing really, about how you've demonstrated all those types of skills. And I'm sure if you just Google kind of standard job interview question, those will come up. And then if you have sort of further interviews, or it might be in the first interview, then it might be sort of more role specific questions. So it might be, how would you prioritize your time between if you're sort of assisting several people, or if you've got campaign work but also admin work, and any strategies that you might have, which you can kind of have a think of how you at the moment balance different demands. Or it could be, talk to us about a campaign that you've seen that you were really impressed by. So you could find, you can literally just have a look online and see what publicity campaigns you can find, what's being reviewed everywhere, and have some examples of books that you're sort of seeing everywhere that you could talk about, and what it is about that you really like. And good to have examples specific to that publisher as well. And then, yeah, a lot of it will kind of be about why you want that role as well, and just making it clear your enthusiasm for the role, and what it is about the publisher that really appeals to you. So just having a lot of examples prepared of books that they publish, and things about the company that you really like, things that you've seen, and then there may be some questions as well about how would you kind of deal with working on a book that you have no knowledge of, in a field that you don't know anything about, or anything like that. And just good to have things prepared, for questions that might be about how you might work on those campaigns. But I think typically, like, entry level jobs, there's a lot of sort of general questions that appear across the industry. So anything that you can find online about sort of general publishing jobs, a lot of it will be about your skills and how you can demonstrate those. I don't know if that's helpful or a bit waffly, but hopefully that's helpful.
No, that was great. Does anyone have anything they would like to add to that?
I'd probably add, maybe not so much for entry level, but for like moving across from entry level. I think normally people can get you to do a press release, which I think can be quite a hard thing to, it's quite a simple thing, but it's a skill to learn ahead of an interview, I would say, like knowing what needs to be included on it, which I won't go into now. But yeah, I would say sometimes a press release is a way that they'll see if you're able to kind of identify the core information. And a press release is usually a 1 or 2 page A4 piece of paper, but it's digital, that you send out to journalists with like core information about a book and its hooks, and it can have quotes and things like that on it. That's the only thing I'd add. I think Lucy gave great.
Great. And then we've had an interesting question. As a publicist, are you showcasing the author more than you're showcasing the book?
Yes, that's oh, sorry.
There you go.
I guess that really depends on each example. If you're working with a slightly more high profile author, then maybe that's what you're going to lead on. But also it depends even like where you're looking to place whatever it is that you're looking to achieve. So if that's an event and you want it to be in a larger venue, then you're going to focus on the author and their kind of connections and what kind of presence they have on social media. But if you're looking for an interview, it's unlikely that you'll get something like that for a debut author. So that again would depend on the author. And then in terms of content as well, it depends. Like if you are looking at something more for like a niche topic, because it might be science-based or nature-based, then that's going to be the content itself. So I think that's quite like a varied question and to try and answer.
Thank you. And then we've had another question that I would like everyone to answer. Can you tell us about a publicity event that you're particularly proud of? Do you have a standard formula, or do you prefer to take a creative approach? Armani, should we start with you?
So with Canongate for the last 3 years, I've been organising the influencer event, which is quite a like crossover between the marketing and publicity department. And that one is really, really quite fun because we're able to showcase 3 or 4 upcoming authors, and just kind of add like a slightly more like playful aspect to the evening as well, and try and create like interactive activities. And I've enjoyed doing that, but I also feel like a standard kind of like in-book shop event is really good as well, because it kind of creates like a really intimate experience for author and also reader, especially if they've read the book before they've come and it's a particular author that they really want to interact with. Obviously when they come to do like the book signing part, that's a really nice thing to kind of see happen, and see that connection in real life.
Thank you. Lucy?
Yeah, I think some of the events that stand out to me as like the ones that I've just been like really proud of or felt they went really well are ones where the audience questions have just been like brilliant, or they've really like resonated with the author, and then the author has just really felt that someone's understood their book. So like sometimes those have been actually debut events, which can be kind of challenging sometimes. Like you might imagine when a bookshop is trying to sell tickets to a debut event, it can be a bit more challenging than if they're trying to sell tickets to a really well-established author who has like a big audience. And yeah, I would say those sorts of events where the questions have just been really fantastic, and I can't really think of any off the top of my head now. But in terms of the kind of formula for events, I think it's just identifying areas where in the UK, particularly perhaps where an author might have a really good audience. If an author writes crime, particularly based in Yorkshire, and the author is based in Yorkshire, obviously with that kind of book, you might really want to go in on doing a few events in Yorkshire. Whereas if it's a nature book that might be relevant across the UK and the author kind of has connections at different bookshops around the UK, then in that case, you're going to want to, do events all over. But it really is just about working with the author, having really open conversations with bookshops and festivals about how well they think an event would do for them. It might be that they just think that like in that location at that time, an event isn't going to sell particularly well. And it's just about being really strategic and thinking, using kind of past experiences or data that you might have in your team or the author's experience to kind of come up with an event plan that works best for that book. And it might not be as well, like a lot of books might not necessarily work for events, but there are other ways to reach readers with that. But events can be fantastic, and I think it is one of the most rewarding parts of our job when you are at an event and you just see an author like really connect with an audience, and that can just make it all feel worth it. But yeah, it's again, just as we've said, just about kind of really tailoring it to that author and that book is what I would say. There's no sort of one set formula for an event.
Thank you. Frances?
Thanks. Yeah, I would like to talk about, I think, virtual events, because that's something that is maybe growing in traction over the past 3 years, and it widens out your reach because it's not so region specific. So in children's, obviously, like I've said, it's slightly different, but now instead of say doing a week's school tour where you might go to 10 schools, we've been doing these online webinars, reaching out to our schools mailing lists, and we've had maybe say over 100 schools sign up for one event, which is an hour long. So rather than spending a week visiting 10 schools, you're reaching hundreds of children, in an hour session. And the authors are super happy with that when they hear about the number of schools that have signed up. So it's also a win-win. It's like great for author care. Cost-wise, it doesn't cost as much money because it's virtual. More schools can come along because it's free for them. And during while you're promoting a book, when it first comes out, authors will often do a lot of these promo events for free. So there's not a lot of cost attached for the publisher or for the people who are coming to the event. So I think online events are really good. And obviously it widens it. When we're talking about inclusion, it widens it out and means more people from lower economic backgrounds or from regions outside London or, other cities with more events are able to come along. So I've been really enjoying working on those.
That's great, thank you. Aya?
A couple of events that kind of come to mind were last year with The Fates. A book I was working on, and I got to organise a kind of joint event with Jennifer Saint, and when her book Hera came out, so it was a really nice moment to join both readerships. It was one of the first events I organised when I came in, and it was quite short notice, and it all came off really nicely and sort of brought kindred readers together. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. And I'm also going to answer that question and really change the tone because I worked on the Britney Spears campaign, and so I got to do a midnight opening or midnight launch at a drag bar in London, and then we did the world's or Europe's first silent disco at Waterstones. So very much thinking outside the box there. Obviously, Britney was unable to join us. Otherwise, that would have been completely different. We've had another question. Is there an aspect of publicity that surprised you when you started? That's a great question. Anyone have any answers?
I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier, but I think it's like the personality types that really make up the whole like cohort of publicists across the UK. That really surprised me because I was really quite like, for context, I started my role as an assistant to the publisher. And so then I moved across to Publicity, and I was kind of being told by my team, like, this is something I think you'd be good for, but it wasn't clear to me. So yeah, I'm saying the same, but it really is just like what other skills that you don't even know that you have that can really make you shine in this kind of role?
I know we're tight for time, so I'll be really quick, but I think one of the things that surprised me is just how much you keep learning. Like, I think because we work with so many different authors with different expertise, and you could be working on a debut novel about farming one day, and a book about nature another day, and a book about history another day, and you really just learn so much. And I think it's very rare to be kind of an adult working in a job and just still be learning so much. And I think that's like really a great thing about working in publicity, but something that I hadn't quite anticipated, because you really just do get to know these topics and these authors, which I think's a really nice thing, but unexpected.
Thank you.
I think kind of how close your relationship to the author can be, you know, spending sort of days with them, emailing them directly a lot of times. Also, probably how much emailing there is. I think that was a big kind of surprise of like, it is a very creative sort of, you do get more on your feet than some other desk jobs, but it is like a creative desk job. But publicity within publishing kind of allows you to have more feet on the ground events and, you know, coffees with journalists and stuff. The coffees with journalists, that probably surprised me when I first started, you know, like sometimes to pitch to them, and festivals.
Thank you. Frances, anything from you?
Right. Yeah, I think the breadth of the role, which I think we've touched on, but the fact that one day, you know, you're doing emails, you might be pitching to, journalists, you could be out doing a school tour, you could be at an evening event. And I think you also said about, you know, there will be times where you'll work evenings or weekends, perhaps doing like a launch or a festival, or you might need to read in your free time. So that is part of the role. So you do have to be prepared, I think, for that you might have to work outside of your hours, but often that's doing quite fun things like events, and you'll often get the time back, you know, from your company. It's not like they expect you to work like out of hours for free all the time. But that might surprise some people that there is quite a bit of outside of normal office hours to take into consideration.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I think that's all that we've got time for. So I'm going to hand back to Rochelle, but thank you, all of our panelists. You were all great.
Thanks, Saba. And yeah, I'm sorry for anyone we didn't get a chance to answer a question for, but we will be doing more future events like this in the future. So don't worry, you will get your questions answered, I'm sure. Thank you so much to the PPC for organising this with us, as well as our wonderful panel for being so generous with their time. Your insights were really amazing about getting into publicity. And I think I'm hoping a lot of people feel really inspired with those tips and tricks for their cover letters and interviews. Please do make sure you follow us on socials, so you can hear about more events like this. Our handle is @_creative access, and it'd be really amazing if you could fill in our feedback form via the QR code on the screen. I'll also just pop it into the chat so you can see, but that really helps us shape future events so that you, our community, can get the most out of them. So yeah, please do fill it in. I'll be sending a follow-up email to you all soon with the details of that, as well as the recording of today's session. But for now, I just want to say thanks so much for joining us on a very sunny lunchtime. So thanks for taking the time to, hang out and listen to the speakers. And hope to see you at an event really soon. Thank you. Bye.